the Death Guard, is one of the most representative chapters of the Chaos Marine's legions. To say that the very concept of the Plague Marine is abhorrent would be a massive understatement. A nigh-perfect, superhuman being that revels in the most disgusting sickness known to all races of the galaxy. This fascinating dichotomy has given me the drive and motivation to create my latest piece. So in this video, I'll show you an overview with the highlights of this project, with a little bit of building and basing tips, and a painting recipe for the Death Guard in the Grimdark style. I cannot stress enough how following a theme and committing even to a small degree to world building are an integral part of the Grimdark style. In our courses at the Grimdark Compendium, we often take this extra step by creating small narratives for our projects, writing our own stories, characters and places, but also giving some context and drawing inspiration from art and lore. In this specific case, while I was working on my concept phase, I stumbled upon an artwork that completely blew my mind. This piece is an artwork from Lewis Jones. In his own words, he wanted the Death Guard to have a look that is an oppressive, unreadable industrial nightmare. That's absolutely perfect. This description resonates immensely with the concept of Death Guard I wanted to represent. Okay, so let's do a rundown of the highlights for this project. If you're interested in watching the entirety of the footage that goes more into the specific details, we are going to release this as a course divided into 4 episodes on the Grimdark Compendium website. The first episode is up right now, and the rest will be released once a week on Fridays. Let's start by taking a look at some of the materials I've used for the building aspect. The Plague Marine is heavily kitbashed and modeled with an array of different materials that I often use to create any miniature or basing work. Apart from the Games Workshop bits that will constitute the base shapes of the Death Guard, I make use of epoxy sculpt. I find this way more convenient than milliput or green stuff. It's way cheaper for the quantity you get, and it's easy to work with, especially if you just want to get some basic shapes done. This material won't hold detail really well, so we really just need it to create the bulk of shapes and forms. I'll use this to increase the height of the miniature, making it tower above any other Plague Marine. Once I get the basic shapes done, I reflect about body language and symbolism for the miniature. This almost religious element and the ecumenic pose really evoke a powerful sensation to me, especially when I start to place other miniatures besides the Marine, and it looks almost like a holy communion or a ceremony, with the loyal servants bathed in pus and filth. So let's take a look at some other useful materials. I feel cheesecloth is really a must-have to make capes and tabards, as it really looks in scale with our models. It's pretty versatile overall. I want this figure very cluttered and almost claustrophobic to look at, very rich in 3D details and textures. So I will also enrich the figure with cables from old phone chargers, paper clips, steel wires of different sizes, and jewelry bits. Since the whole premise and mood of this Plague Marine will heavily lean to a dirty and oppressive industrial aesthetic, these will be perfect to create lots of visual interest. I also really like using jewelry chains of different sizes to create ornaments or weapons. I'm literally obsessed with flails, and I love to recreate them using real chains and wires. And also barbed wire used in scale modeling, like this one I got from AK Interactive. I try to make the backpack and cables and wires as intricate as possible, and really try to nail down the nightmarish and horror industrial aesthetic. As for the basic materials, I find that cork sheets are essential to build verticality onto your bases. Easy to use and cheap. Just make sure to work out the edges with pliers or a knife so that you get rid of that squared look that makes it read as a piece of cork. Paver base is an exceptional tool in your arsenal. This is basically the type of tile grout that goes in between tiles and becomes mortar if you mix it with water in a mixing tool. It contains a variety of sizes of little rocks and dirt, and we use it all the time in our basing tutorials. It's great to give a unifying texture or cover gaps between your construction works. I also often use this type of terrain paste, like Vallejo mud or AK interactive terrains. They are ready to use and mostly acrylic based, so they dry pretty fast and let you achieve ground texture very quickly. I usually like my bases pretty simple and game friendly. However, I advise not to underestimate the importance of a base. You have the opportunity to tell a story or simply depict the type of world in which your miniatures are fighting or inhabiting at that moment. This is going to be a muddy wasteland with trenches filled with pus and bodily ichors. Perhaps a sanctuary for our Death Guard cult, or the last visited planet where the Lord of Diseases has merely just started spreading his sickening gifts. Okay, so let's talk about the painting process for the Death Guard and the various paints I used. To showcase the painting recipe, I will use this piece of plastic art that I've put together in around 10 minutes. This composition doesn't really make sense as it is. It's supposed to be more like an indicative guide, a sort of 3D concept board. So I added some pipes and wires, sculpted some nasty flesh bits, and finally put some AK interactive texture to replicate what I did on my Plague Marine before the priming stage. Again, just very fast, it doesn't need to be perfect or complicated. As for my choice of acrylics, I use a variety of different brands. I think the majority are just good paints overall, and they only have some minor differences, mainly in consistency and final finish. My go-to in terms of primers are the Steinres by Badger. It's a self-leveling primer that gives me good results, and I've grown fond of it in my experience. I enjoy Citadel paints, and especially the range of washes or shades as they call them, and have a couple of their contrast paints at my disposal. AK Interactive, mainly tones of grey, green and off-whites. And Vallejo colors, especially the Model Air, as they're perfect to spray through with the airbrush. So I usually start off with a grey primer to have a good neutral surface. I proceed by doing a base color pass of Death Guard Green by Citadel, followed up by a Steinres Pale Sage. It looks like a natural highlight for the Death Guard Green. Vallejo German Red Brown is then passed on these lower details and areas to give a little bit of value and temperature. It doesn't need to be perfect, as we're going to filter and unify this many times later. I just want to place it on and perceive the sensation of deep rust and sickness. Then coming up with a Vallejo white-gray to give just a little bit of a final highlight. Not going too crazy with it, but taking care of flesh and a couple of spots on the green armor. Now I want a little bit of modulation and filtering over both the green plate and flesh. So I start with a watered-down glaze of Death Guard Green mixed with a drop of Imperial Fist Yellow, letting the color pool up here and there, intentionally leaving some streaks and starting to diversify all of this wide blank space. For the flesh, I'll instead work with very watered down Rocard flesh. And then wet blend German Red Brown in the recesses for some volume and temperature. And then, when it's dry, I come in again with Rocart flesh, but this time mixed with some white grey, to bring some very stylized highlights in the sort of stippling motion. I don't want clean or regular lines, but rather dots and irregular patches for a mottled look. And to finish up the base colors, I'll use Rune Lord brass at the top left corner to sort of symbolize the armor trim for the Death Guard scheme. Once everything is nice and dry, I will proceed with some enamel washes and weathering effects. If you've been following us for a while, you know that we make extensive use of enamel washes in all of our videos and courses. And just in case you've never heard of them before, you must know that they're a great tool to filter and wash miniatures, as you can remove and control them however you see fit with very forgiving working times. Also, they are perfect for the Grimdark style, as most of them leave a certain grainy, microscopic texture that sells the effect of dirt and grime. I use Villainy Ink Goon's Grime as a unifying wash, as the color is the perfect match for the scheme. This first pass is slightly diluted with a brushful of mineral spirits, just to make it flow nicely and cover the entirety of the surface. After about 15 seconds under the blow dryer at low heat, we can come with a Q-tip, one side dry and the other damp with mineral spirits, and start removing the enamel. As you can see, we can decimate our wash and can immediately achieve these stains and variations that can give pretty cool and realistic results in no time. The other benefit of enamel washes is that we can keep working as long as we want and modulate the surface with a brush or Q-tip and mineral spirits to our heart's content. Once I'm satisfied with the first pass, I dry the surface with a blow dryer and come in with a second pass of Goon's Grime, this time with no dilution, straight from the pot, and go more into the recesses and separations between volumes. It is extremely easy to create all these surface variations and also introduce a variety of different finishes. See these slightly satin marks and stains? That's typically how mineral spirits and enamel paints react upon application and removal. There's truly a world to discover behind how these paints work. Next up is Dirty Down Rust, probably the best rust product available on the market right now. We have a good video explaining how it works that you can watch here on YouTube. Mainly getting it on the top left trim, and some small patches here and there, especially near those red-brown undertones. Pretty simple and straightforward. Now let's quickly do a rundown of some optional and additional steps that we can add. The first couple are some of the obscure and crazy techniques that we teach on the Compendium. They are completely optional and you can skip these for now. First off, the glue application. It is explained in great detail in our Tyranid series, and I can't stress enough that before you even think of attempting this technique on your own, you must know all the ins and outs and what tools to use. This technique is no joke and can ruin your models forever. I apply it in downwards motions to create textures on the green armor, but I also want that juicy gloss finish on the fleshy part of the practice blank. In addition, it creates a save state, so our previous paint job is secured. Okay, next up is the soft pressing. It consists in creating scratches of the layers of paint to render realistic wear and tear effects. My ideal type of Death Guard armor is rich in sickening details like this and should look incredibly corrupted, with these vertical 3D streaks running down, almost textured like some sort of contorted wood or bone. We've got all this shine and gloss, and definitely need something that goes in contrast with that. I have an old bottle of dark brown enamel wash that has been sitting there for a long time, and its medium has mostly evaporated. This makes it extra powdery and chalky looking when it dries, So here, I use it to bring a much needed contrast around the edges of volumes and extra streaks, like crusted stains and dark grime. To finish it up, I use a very gentle application of Villainy Ink Decay of Death, and introduce this powdery effect that dries quite on the light side and replicates decayed material. Another cool thing I like to do to add variation is to come with a stiff brush, dipped in Vallejo sepia ink, diluted with water and glaze medium, and do some spattering and splashes with my finger. If some of these stains are too stark, we can just rub them off very quickly. Okay, let's take a look at flesh. It's actually pretty simple, so let's see this cool combo right here. I'm starting with a Citadel Wash Colia green shade, applying it watered down like a sort of glaze, and getting it also in the recesses. Then I use the reductive technique with isopropyl alcohol 99% to dissolve the wash, basically cancelling the excess color and leaving it just in the shape of small veins and capillaries. This is not really doable to the same degree with enamel washes, and that's the reason why I'm using acrylic and alcohol. With Villainy Ink Carry-On Crimson, I then come in and apply a general unifying enamel wash, and proceed, as always, to remove it from the majority of the surface, just leaving a subtle filter. To finish up the recipe, I will add some special effects to replicate the feel of necrotic flesh. Nuln oil, blood for the blood god, and gloss varnish are mixed together and applied around the flesh-infested areas and boils around the center. Of course, again, this is a blank, plain slate. It's like our main indicative guide, so it doesn't make much sense right now. However, all these different passes and steps will make way more sense on an actual model. The Plague Marine and Cultists were basically painted with these recipes. You can see that some of the effects are quite striking, especially looking at the Plague Servant here, that I did starting from a Bestiarum Miniatures model. In typical Dark Ages Workshop fashion, I also added some hair to make it look extra disgusting, and went as far as looking at too many sickening reference images from the real world to recreate necrosis and rotting skin. Now let's assemble the scene. This unholy communion of pus and rot is completed when I add the third figure, a servant bringing a foul bolt gun as an offering to his master. I really enjoy this industrial aesthetic and a point of focus on a sort of religious ceremony. If I stop and think about the rituals, the views, the everyday life of the servants of Nurgle, I get all sorts of cool ideas that I hope I can bring to life sometime in the future. The 4 episodes course will contain extra recipes and goes much into the details of kit bashing, basing, the plagued servants with cloth, skin, and hair application, and the entirety of the Plague Marine. So, if you wish to support us, you can head over to the Grimdark Compendium and watch it there. We'll be adding an episode every week on Fridays. Feel free to check it out if you enjoyed this one, and take a look at the Villainy Ink enamel washes while you're there. I hope you enjoyed the video and that it inspires you to make some cool looking miniatures that stand out. And experiment a little bit out of your comfort zone. Try out some enamel washes and special effects, implement surface variations, and create some cool narrative around your models. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next.